Morning. Okay, welcome to IP Tech Tuesday number 19. Today we're going to talk about details. A classic example of writing a patent is writing a patent on a chair. Very straightforward. You have a seat and you have 4 legs, right? No, it's not. Writing a patent on a chair, maybe you also have to write a patent on how the pieces of wood are connected together. Maybe you also have to talk about the details of how the threads hold one piece of wood and the head provides compression with the other piece of wood. Maybe you need to talk about the shape of the threads of the screw. And look at this, there's an article about thermal treatment of the wood and how it affects the screw connection. Okay, so I'm just talking about a chair and the kind of details that I might have to put into my patent application when I'm talking only about a single aspect of this product are quite a bit. And you realize I only did a drill down. I didn't talk about the cushion. I didn't talk about the glue. I didn't talk about the contact with the floor. There's a lot of details in reality. And the questions that we ask as patent attorneys is, can reality be described in all of its glorious detail? And just to make it clear what I mean about reality, in a real patent application, we describe not only some new idea, but we describe multiple variations of things that simply do not exist. And today I'm going to talk about the simplest problem when we're trying to describe a single reality, but we want to describe it in a way which is correct, precise, accurate, useful, and also in sufficient detail. And everybody here on the call knows that that is really, really difficult. So some people say, how about we focus only on what I have in the claim? So yeah, I have a 50-page application, but I only have 20 claims, and they only describe altogether 15 different features. So maybe I only have to give the details on these 15 features. So on the one hand, maybe your claims are really narrow in scope, so you don't need a lot of detail. But on the other hand, what are the chances that your claims are actually final, that you're not going to want to add more details from the detailed description? And to help us a little bit more, any of you familiar with game theory must have seen a game matrix. It's a 2x2. Player A chooses a row, player B chooses a column, and it's very abstract. And it actually does not model anything about reality except some very basic underlying trade-offs. And one of the reasons they do that is probably to make it tractable. And I want to compare it to a different strategy issue. Anybody who watched The Princess Bride, you know that Wesley, who's also known as the Dread Pirate Roberts, is a master strategist. In fact, he's so good, they bring him back from the dead just so he can plan a strategy for them. And after they describe the problem, he says, if only we had a wheelbarrow. Okay? Just one more detail. They had one, they forgot to tell him that. We often have that problem when we write patents. Of course, also in regular life, we have that problem. Every time I buy a new cell phone, the resolution doubles. You know, it used to be 500, and then it was 1,000 pixels, and then it was 2,000, and now it's 64 megapixels in the image. Okay, so we obviously want to have more details in our life, and we also need it in order to do things like strategy. So I have here two quotes that I found about details and organization. And in the first quote, you can just look at the part in bold, and that's really, even though he's talking about historians, he's actually talking about patent attorneys. It forces him, whose urges to generalize and dissect, to qualify and particularize, and above all, to combine analysis with narrative. So that is actually what we do all day. And in the second quote, Collingswood, he's a philosopher of history. You have got beyond the stage at which rules can guide action, and you go back to improvising as best you can. Unfortunately, that's also what we do, and I'm going to talk about a little bit today. I used this beautiful fractal image because the more you dig in, the more there's details, just like in the first example of the chair. And patent attorneys, we love details. Everybody here has a story where the patent was about to be rejected, but luckily there was some detail in the specification which we were able to put into the claim, and the examiner said, yes, we're giving you a patent. We also have the opposite kind of story. But there's also formal reasons why we need detail. There's enablement and description requirements, and we have to show that there's no undue experimentation. Figuring out details usually requires experimentation. It has to be suitable for a person of ordinary skill in the art. Possibly there's a requirement for best mode. Again, it's details. When you do prosecution, you have the dual problems of the examiner misunderstanding you and the examiner applying BRI. It means broadest unreasonable interpretation. And they interpret any word you write any way they want, but if you have detail, you can perhaps narrow it. Any of you who's done prosecution not in your native language, as in, let's say, in China, you know that when your claims and specifications are translated into that language, it might not mean anymore what you think it means. In any case, often the actual value of the patent is found in the details. Now, details do more than just formal requirements. It's very difficult to draft a strong patent without details. Why? Because in the real world, people use the details in order to design around. A lot of engineering work is figuring out which details in the real world can be used as a shortcut. Instead of solving the real problem, you solve some sort of shortcut problem. At the same time, details in the application help you show what other alternative designs should be covered. Anybody who's tried to write a claim that covers 7 different embodiments provided by the client has often discovered, especially after prosecution, that the abstractions that you're managing to put into the claim are not capable of covering all of the embodiments that are actually written in the application, and they definitely will not cover the embodiments that are not written in the application. When you dig into the details, it helps you identify weak spots in your patent on the competitor's product. The more you work on the details, the more likely is a person writing the application will actually understand what they're working about. These abstractions are kind of difficult. There's a general belief that patent attorneys have that the more details you have, the more likely you are to have the detail when you need it. And last but not least, when you provide details, it convinces the examiner that at the time of filing the application, you actually had the invention in hand. That can be a requirement in order to get a patent. Why not to provide details? Money. Details cost money. Details interfere with the client focus and with the attorney focus. Details take time. Details can distract from what is actually important. Details are not known, not the details for what the client is doing, and not the details for what the client is not doing now, but you want to prevent the competition from doing. When you have more details, you usually have more go-arounds in writing the application. Applications after a few go-arounds turn into a total mess. You don't want to provide details to your competitor. I'm putting aside the best mode requirement. The more details you have, possibly, the easier it is for your competitor to copy you. So if I have to summarize all of this, on the one hand, we have the attorney who has some sort of paranoia about what happens if I don't have these details. And on the other hand, we have the client, I'm calling him stingy, but let's call it economical, doesn't want to write a 400-page application when a 25-page application will do. You can't do it, okay? I mean, I said we want to add more details, but it's not going to work. Here's a story that actually happened to me. An EPO examiner said, I searched the claims and there's nothing patentable. I'm not going to search the other claims that you might have written, because your application has the word optionally 263 times. That means you have 2 to the power of 263 different combinations. Even if I do each one in a second, I'm not going to be done in time. The world will end before that. Okay, so you can never have enough details. And even in a very simple case, you have one embodiment, 20 optional features, and 4 alternatives. That's 80 different embodiments. Are you going to have 80 different actual figures? Are you going to have measurements for everything? No. Even deciding what you want to claim is actually unsolvable. See the cat over here on the stair? Somebody tells you, write a claim that covers a cat. There's so many different possibilities. And dependent claims, even more possibilities. Okay, so it's just not possible to do all the details. And having more details can also cause failure. The simple case is the details have to limit something, and maybe they don't limit what you want them to limit. In general, the more details you have, the more details you need. The more details you have, the more likely you are to have a mistake. In general, though, I think we can agree that whatever you claim or plan to claim should be checked carefully for the level of detail that you provide, especially in view of the potential failure modes of that application. I heard from Gene Vintor. He said 2 levels down, 2 levels of detail beyond your component. It's an interesting guideline. So what do? We're patent attorneys. We use abstraction, and abstraction is supposed to help us with the details, but it doesn't. Why not? Because none of the benefits that you get from having details are provided by abstraction. On the right, I have pictures from one of my favorite Stack Overflow answers. The question was, what is the difference between generalization and abstraction? So you start with this birthday cake. You can abstract it to this very abstract icon of a birthday cake, or you can generalize it to all these different kinds of cakes. So when we go from the picture on top to the picture on the bottom, we need to provide a lot of details. Now, all of you, besides perhaps wanting to eat all of these different yummy cakes, want the claims to cover them and to cover them particularly, which means we're going to have to add the details. So no matter how many of these beautiful abstract definitions we're going to have, and we need them, we're still going to need the details. However, the abstract definitions really help us support the arrangement of details. Okay, the application has a lot of details. How do we arrange them? One last warning about abstractions. Here's a quote from Fred Brooks, who wrote the book No Mythical Man Month. He's famous in software engineering. And he's warning us that you might abstract away the complexity in such a way that it abstracts away the essence. Now, complexity means that you have different components with interactions. That's way beyond detail. When we write a patent application and we look at the claims, if you are the best patent attorney in the world, claim 1 will have only a single limitation in it, perhaps. So the invention in claim 1 will always be very simple. But you have dependent claims, and the dependent claims bring back the complexity of the invention in all of its glory. The warning is, don't abstract it away. Anybody who's done abstractions, and maybe this should be a subject of a separate talk, how many abstractions, which abstractions, can we fit everything inside? How many details do we need to support an abstract class? Do our abstractions actually help us claim, or do they interfere with our claiming? And if we have enough abstractions, so instead of having too many details, we have too many abstractions. As a general guideline, I'd like to suggest what I call the ladder of abstraction. Let's assume that an application can only cover a certain number of rungs of abstraction. And I'm proposing the number 5. Okay? Abstract, more abstract, more abstract, more abstract. And you can put these rungs close together or far apart. And wherever you have one of these rungs, you need more details in order to support the abstraction. But you can't have too many. And I'm suggesting again the number 5. I made it up about 8 years ago. Perhaps it's a different number. Okay? So when you look at an application and you ask yourself, where detail, where abstractions, this tool can help you. Or we have a different tool. And the other tool is stories. And in fact, you always will use a story when you write an application. Otherwise, it'll be very boring to write and very boring to read. Traditional knowledge is usually provided using stories. Stories help organize our thinking. They're easy to follow. They can definitely organize. When you have a lot of details, they can organize all of the details. They do it differently from just having a taxonomy, 0.1, 1.1, 1.3. Stories can be used to check the coherence of details and check ideas. And they're also generative in the sense that they help us explore the invention and the scope of protection. Just to give you an example of using a story to check the coherence of details and test ideas, what we have here on the right is an illustration of Einstein's theory of relativity. And the question is, the Gedanken experiment, which Einstein talked about, I imagined what it would be like being on a beam of light and looking at another beam of light. Okay, so that's a story. And after he wrote down all of the details, he realized that there was a problem that what is the speed of light? Is it a constant or not? If it's a constant, when you're on the speed of on a beam of light, the other beam should look like it's not moving. So how is a patent like a story? And it is. So one temptation is to write a patent like the hero's journey. You get famous cycle, you get called to an adventure, you get some aid from somebody, you get lost, you nearly die, you change, you come back. It's very good because it helps focus on application. The hero is, of course, the invention or the inventive idea. The problem is it might focus the application too much. So if you're using a story in order to arrange your thoughts, I'd like to suggest a TV show like Friends or many other TV shows. We have a gang of people, and each one of them has their own abilities and gets focused part of the time. And it's like when you write an application, and sometimes you're focusing on one part of the technology, sometimes you're focusing on the result, sometimes you're focusing on the material. There's a story told by the parent, and there's a story of the invention. And who are we telling the story to? I always say, oh, the investor, the competitor, the client. Today, I'm talking about stories that we talk to ourselves in order to help us deal with the complexity of the world. Problem is that stories are so powerful that we tend to twist the fact to fit the stories. We look at an invention, we say, oh, I know what the invention is. And then all of the details that the inventor gave us, they fit what we understand, even if it has nothing actually to do with what the inventor said. And yes, sometimes it's the inventor's fault too, but one of the typical ways we make a mistake is we use language which is very evocative, fixedly connected, permanent. And who knows what these words mean, but once we use them, we're stuck. And I found this great quote on the internet. The less he knows about the topic, the more confident he's going to be that he's understanding it correctly. Why? The confidence he feels is not determined by the accuracy of what he knows, but by the coherence and ease of the story that's constructed from what's available. So, poor patent attorney, he got 10 pages of disclosure. He read it, didn't understand it. Suddenly, flash of light, he understands what the invention is. Everything fits together. He writes a patent application. Oops. Where did this confidence come from? Because he now understands it, or she. Sorry. My take-home message. I think that one of the critical aspects of being able to be a good patent attorney is to be able to organize in your mind, yes, and on paper too, but in your mind, all of the details of the invention, your protection scheme, the client portfolios, the ecosystem, a lot. And all of that while you're considering potential futures and events. Since it's impossible to do it as is, you have to have some sort of system, and it's going to include stories, and it's going to include abstractions, it's going to include some way of arranging details, and we're going to make mistakes. But I'm urging you to be a little bit more thoughtful about the different types of mistakes that we make because the world has an awful lot of detail and because we're trying to somehow deal with this complexity. Okay, so I'm stopping recording.